Okay, good morning, everybody. What we're going to start today is we're going to start with module number 3, in which we are learning JavaScript. Yesterday, anyhow, I have given you a little introduction to what is JavaScript, why do we use it. Today, we will be jumping into more to understand what is JavaScript. We will be seeing exactly what are the advantages of using JavaScript, what are the disadvantages of using JavaScript, where to write JavaScript, and all these introductory concepts of JavaScript we will be learning. Now, yesterday I told you that JavaScript is a client-side scripting language, which means that the script executes on the client's machine. In the concept of the internet, there are two important entities, the client and the server. Server has the resources and the client will request for these resources. What are these resources? These resources are nothing but pages, documents. These documents or pages are either static documents or static pages or dynamic pages. Static pages are all HTML pages, and dynamic pages are pages that are with extension .php, .jsp, and so on. Static pages are pages which are with extension .html. And what is HTML? You know, HTML basically is a page which you design in your website. A website can contain multiple HTML pages, and these HTML pages also contain a little CSS code that is used to make the pages more attractive. You use CSS to make web pages more attractive. So basically, we should understand what is the technology and why it is used for. HTML is used for designing your web pages. CSS is used for styling your web pages to make it more attractive and beautiful. Where do we use JavaScript is a question. JavaScript is used for making your web pages more interactive. Okay, JavaScript is used for making pages more interactive. Nowadays, JavaScript is used for even more useful things. It is also used for server-side scripting, but we are going to study JavaScript on the client side only. We are not going to study JavaScript on the server side. We are going to study JavaScript on the client side. So very quickly, let us learn exactly some of the concepts of JavaScript. What is JavaScript and what it can do? First of all, remember that JavaScript was developed by a company called as Netscape in the year 1996. In the year 1996, we will come to the history of JavaScript later on. And from the name JavaScript, you may think that it is similar to Java, or it is something that can do what Java can do and all that. But please remember that JavaScript and Java are two distinct, are two different languages. There is a little similarity, but not in the way they work. JavaScript doesn't work in the way Java works. Why? Because you know that Java is a complete high level object oriented programming language which requires you to write a program, and then after that you have to compile the program, then you have to run the program. So that is what happens with Java programs. And then after you have compiled the program, you want to run the program, you need something called as a JVM, the Java virtual machine, the runtime environment of Java to run your Java code. That is required by Java. But JavaScript is not like that. JavaScript does not require any virtual machine. It does not require anything. It runs on the browser. Remember that JavaScript, if you want to run, it requires a browser. In the browser, it executes. So the browser basically has the runtime environment for running JavaScript. The browser basically has, you can say, the runtime environment for running JavaScript. Any programming language, if you want to run it, you need that programming language's runtime environment. If you want to run a C program in your computer, you need C runtime environment. If you want to run Python program in your computer, you need Python runtime environment. So on, any programming language you take, if you want to run it in your computer, you need that programming language's runtime environment. Java's runtime environment is also called as a JVM, the Java's virtual machine. So like that, if you want to run JavaScript in your machine, what you need is a browser, because browsers contain the runtime environment for JavaScript. So that's about it. I'm not going to go into too much of detail of this. If you have understood that much, it is more than sufficient. Now, what is the similarity between Java and JavaScript? The only similarity is that in JavaScript, everything is object based. Everything is object based. If you declare a variable, it is object. If you have a function, it is an object. Everything in JavaScript is an object, just like in Java. In Java, there are basic data types also, like integers and all. But Java contains concept of object-oriented programming language, where there is an object. Through the object, you can invoke the built-in functions. You can invoke the functions. You can invoke the methods through the object. Like that only in JavaScript, you can create objects, and then through the object, you can invoke some functions. Okay, so we will see the syntax of JavaScript later on. But what is the similarity between Java and JavaScript? That both are object based. Okay, there is object based. JavaScript is dynamically typed. This is an important concept. JavaScript is dynamically typed, which means that when you declare a variable in JavaScript, you can assign it any value. Whatever value you assign to it, the variable will become a variable of that type. Okay, so please remember that JavaScript is dynamically typed. You declare a variable, whatever value you assign to that variable becomes a variable of that type. Whereas Java is strictly typed, or it is statically typed. It is statically typed, which means that you have to declare the variable initially in the program. In Java, if you have studied Java, so you will know that when you declare a variable in Java, you have to do it first only. You have to say int ABC. You have to say that ABC is a variable of type integer first only. But in JavaScript, it is not like that. You declare a variable and then you just assign it a value. You don't have to say what type of a variable it is. That is one difference between JavaScript and Java. Let us go further and try to understand what is the meaning of client-side scripting. I have already told you. Two entities are there on the web, client and the server. A client is somebody who requests for resources. Server is somebody who sends the resources. Client basically means the browser, and whatever executes on the browser is called as client-side scripting. And what is server-side scripting? Anything that executes on the server is called as server-side scripting. So for your subject this time, we are going to learn JavaScript and write client-side scripting using JavaScript. And we are also going to learn server-side scripting, in which we are going to write the server-side script using PHP. Now let us understand how JavaScript basically works. One more thing that I want to tell you about JavaScript is that I'm going to come to it later on. There is a special section for that where we will understand where to write JavaScript. But let me give you a hint. Let me tell you. Let me give you a hint, exactly a little introduction to where JavaScript is written. Please remember that JavaScript is also written in HTML, in between HTML. If you remember your CSS class, if you remember where are the different places where we write CSS, you know that there are three places where we write CSS. It is, we write CSS inline within the tags, or we write it embedded in the head section of the page, or we write it external. We write it in the external files. So these are the three places where we write CSS. Similar to that, JavaScript is also written inside HTML code only. But where? But where? You can write JavaScript inline within a tag. You can write JavaScript embedded at the head section of the page, or you can write JavaScript in external files. Same, wherever you can write CSS, you can write JavaScript. So finally, what you have to understand is that JavaScript is also written between HTML tags only. Somewhere in between HTML tags only we write JavaScript, just like CSS. Where do we write CSS? We write it in the style tag. In the head section, we define a style tag, and then in the style tag, we define the rules for the styling. So we write CSS code. JavaScript is also written in HTML in script tag. We write it in script tag. So we will understand this. We will understand. We will write some examples on JavaScript. We will write some HTML pages in which we write JavaScript, all that. We write it in the script tag. So this, let us understand this diagram here. This is a web server. This is a client. The client has a computer, a browser. So he opens the browser and then types a URL, and then he sends a request. He says get vacation.html. So there is a page called as vacation.html. So the vacation.html file is kept on the server. The client sends this request. The client sends this request vacation.html. and then the page is picked up by the server, and then that vacation.html file is sent back to the client's machine. So you can see this second step is vacation.html is sent back to the client's machine, the direction you can see. And then what does this vacation.html file contain? It contains basically this. It contains a body tag, then it may contain a heading tag, then it contains, this is important, script tag. In the script tag, there is some JavaScript. This is an incomplete file. This is only to show you exactly where exactly JavaScript appears. And then this file is sent back to the client's machine. It comes here. And then on the client's machine, this JavaScript executes. This JavaScript that is written in the page executes on the client machine. Now you will ask me a question as to when will the JavaScript get executed? The JavaScript code will get executed when the page loads. When the page loads, the JavaScript executes. Or sometimes if you want the JavaScript to execute based on user action, you may also do that. You may also do that. For example, let us say this page contains a form. In the form, there is a button. If you click on the button, you want the JavaScript to execute, you can even write the code like that. So it depends upon the developer when you want this JavaScript to execute. You can execute this JavaScript whenever the page gets loaded into the browser of the client, or you want to execute this JavaScript when a button is clicked. You want to execute this JavaScript when the mouse is brought on top of a button. So depending upon different events, because of user action, you can execute JavaScript at different times. It depends completely on the developer. Now the JavaScript comes to the client's machine, executes the JavaScript, and then the browser can lay out the display to the user. And then the display, whatever is there in this page, gets displayed to the user on the page. Basically, this is what happens. First, the request goes to the client, from the client to the server, containing for a request for a page containing JavaScript. So that page comes back to the client's machine. If there is any JavaScript, it gets executed on load, or sometimes it may execute depending upon user action. The page is displayed to the user. Basically, this is a simple procedure of how pages containing JavaScript are requested and it is displayed to the client. What are the advantages of JavaScript? The advantages of JavaScript is that, first of all, what are the advantages of JavaScript? You can say there are many advantages of JavaScript, client-side scripting. The first is that whatever is getting processed on the server, you can actually reduce the burden on the server. So if there is some code that is executing on the server, and if some part of that the client can execute, then the burden of the server can be reduced. Now, please remember that not all of the burden of the server can be reduced and everything can be executed on the client machine. That is not possible. Whatever has to be executed on the server should be executed on the server only. Only few things can be put on the client. For example, if there is a form, in the form the user is supposed to enter his registration details like his name, email ID, phone number and all that. And there is a button. When you click on the button, this form gets submitted. The data that you have entered in the form gets submitted to the server, and the server can retrieve that data. After retrieving the data, the server can check if everything is proper. If there is a phone number, whether the phone number is entered properly or no. If there is an email ID, the email ID is entered properly or no by the user. If there is a name, whether the name is entered properly or no. So this validation the server has to do, whether everything is entered properly or no. Now this validation, whether the phone number is entered properly, whether the email ID is entered properly, whether the name is entered properly, this validation, whether the data is valid or no, can be given to the client to do it. This validation of the data that the client submits to the server can be given to the client. Now that burden of validating the data can be put to the client. The server need not do it. So only these type of things can be given to the client, not something where the server is definitely required. Now, after I submit the data to the server, after the server has validated the data, let us say that the server has to store this data into the database. Now, storing the data into the database, that work has to be done by the server only. Storing data into the database of the server cannot be done by the client. So now that work of yours is having two tasks in it. First, to validate the data, and next is to store the data in the database. So validating the data can be done by the client. Storing of the data into the database should be done only by the server. The client cannot do it because the database is on the server's machine. Client do not have access to that. You understood? So basically, what we can do is we can allow the client to process a little bit of processing on the client's machine so that a little burden of the server can be reduced. But you have to understand one thing, that some things has to be done only by the server, but the remaining things of validating data, this, that, everything can be done by the client's machine, by the JavaScript. So advantages of JavaScript is that a little bit of burden of the server can be taken by the client and it can be executed on the browser. With this, what happens is the browser can respond rapidly. Now, if the user is waiting for the server to process that and give you a result, it will take a long time. But if since it is happening on the browser only, since it is happening by JavaScript on the browser only, on the client machine, the browser will be able to respond very, very quickly, rapidly. Okay, so first of all, burden of the server can be reduced. Browser, when he does the validation or running of script, it is more rapid, it is more quick. This is the second advantage. JavaScript can interact with downloaded HTML in a way the server cannot. Now, JavaScript can access elements of HTML and can respond to it quickly compared to the server. Okay, so you can, this third point here indicates that JavaScript can interact with the HTML more quickly. Okay, it can interact with the HTML code more quickly. So these are the three advantages of JavaScript. Now, what are the disadvantages of JavaScript? As it is, there are no disadvantages of JavaScript. But the problem is that if you have a web page in which you have written some JavaScript code, you will think that the browsers will execute that, but not all browsers will be able to execute JavaScript. What are the reasons that not all browsers will be able to execute JavaScript is that the user in the browser has got an option to disable JavaScript. So if I go to my browser, if I have my browser like this, if I go to, let us say, Google page, then, I can go to the settings here. In the settings of the browser here somewhere, there is an option to disable JavaScript. I don't know whether I will get that. JavaScript, clear browser, cookies, security settings. So somewhere here, you have an option to disable JavaScript. Somewhere here it is there. In all browsers, it will be there. In all browsers, there is a possibility of disabling JavaScript. So the user can go to the browser and disable the JavaScript. So if in the browser, if I have disabled the JavaScript, then if your page contains JavaScript, then the browser will not be able to execute it. The browser will not be able to execute it. The second disadvantage is that some browsers don't handle complicated JavaScript. It depends upon a browser to browser. Some browsers handle all latest JavaScript, but some browsers do not handle latest JavaScript. So there is always a possibility of clash in versions. There is a version clash. If one browser supports, let us say Java 8, JavaScript 8, if I'm just giving you an example, JavaScript 8, if let us say there is something like till there I can handle. If let us say they introduce JavaScript 9 and if people start writing their code in JavaScript 9, then the browsers will not be able to handle it. So what I mean to say by this is that browsers may not be able to support all versions of JavaScript. The latest versions or the more complex functions of JavaScript may not be handled by all the browsers. So this is another disadvantage of JavaScript. Just please remember these two disadvantages. In the examination, they may ask you a question like that. They may ask you a question like that as to what are the advantages and disadvantages of JavaScript. They will ask you what is JavaScript, where it is used, what are the advantages and disadvantages of JavaScript. They will ask you that. Okay. Fine. Now, let us understand a little bit about what is Flash. Let us understand what is Flash. Now remember, it has got nothing to do with JavaScript. JavaScript it's a separate technology altogether. We use it for something more specific. It is used only when it is required and all that. On the other hand, there is one more technology called as Flash. Okay, Flash code. You must have seen that in most of the websites, there is a lot of animation and, you must have seen some in user interfaces, GUI in the web pages, which is very attractive, and there are attractive buttons. There is a lot of animation. The moment I click on that, automatically you will see that something starts moving. There are many websites. I may not be able to give you a good example, but if you search the internet and say websites designed using Flash, maybe you can just put that keyword in Google, and then you can search on Google websites designed using Flash. Put that, and then you will get a list of websites. Click on that, visit these websites, and see how these websites are developed. They are very, very attractive. Okay, but when Flash is used, there are its own disadvantages of using Flash. First of all, if you want your browser to display Flash websites, then in your browser you should have the Flash plugin. You should have the Flash plugin. If the Flash plugin is not there, then your Flash website will not be displayed to you. Okay, so all these disadvantages are there for Flash. But basically, if let us say you have developed your website using Flash, uh, then when you develop a website using Flash, what you get after developing it is you get a file called as .swf. .swf is the file that you get after you have designed your website using Flash. This SWF file you have to embed that into HTML page, and then you can host this website on a web server, and the web server will be able to deliver you this website. So what happens in case of a Flash website is this. First, I request the page vacation.html. In this vacation.html, I have embedded my SWF file. So the vacation.html file comes back to the browser, in which there is an object tag. In the object tag, then I write game.swf. Basically, I use the object tag to embed Flash content into a web page. This web page comes back to the client machine here, and this web page comes. SWF file is not still downloaded, so the request for the game.swf file goes to the server. Game.swf file comes back to the browser. Okay, so this itself is a big disadvantage. The HTML file comes first, then the SWF file comes, and these SWF files are big. Actually, they are big, they're heavy, in terms of megabytes. So it will take a little time for it to load. Okay, so that's why Flash websites are a little slow. So that SWF file comes back, and then the browser, now what it does is the browser cannot execute SWF file, so it directly gives that SWF file to the plugin. Okay, there is a Flash plugin, so this SWF file is given to the plugin, and the plugin starts executing that SWF file. Basically, this is what happens when a Flash website is requested by the client. When a Flash website is requested by the client, this is the procedure. The HTML file is first requested. It is sent to the client's machine. Then the game.swf file is requested. That SWF file comes back to the client's machine. Then the browser gives that SWF file to the plugin, and the plugin starts executing that. So this plugin has to be first installed in the browser. This doesn't come in the browser by default. You have to install it later on. Okay, so this is what happens in case of Flash. Just remember, okay, just remember this small diagram. You can draw your own diagram also, no problem. Okay, you need not always draw something like this. So they may ask you in the examination a question as to what is the difference between Flash websites and websites written using JavaScript. So you can just draw these two diagrams. What happens in case of JavaScript, and then what will happen in case of Flash. You can just draw these small two diagrams and you can explain. So this is explanation for that only. And similarly, when you develop web pages in which you can also write applets. I don't know whether you have studied applets or no, but if you have studied applets, you can also develop your websites using applets. So the first is by using simple HTML and JavaScript. The second technique of developing websites is using Flash. And the third way of developing websites is you can place an applet in the HTML and then that executes. When you place an applet, what happens is applet, remember, is written using Java, core Java, pure Java. Okay, not JavaScript, Java. So for Java, you know that you require JVM or the Java runtime environment. So let us say I request the page containing the applet. The page comes back to the client's machine, which contains the applet ab.class. So the ab.class is requested. The ab.class comes back to the browser. Now the browser cannot execute that class file. So it has to give it to the JRE for the Java runtime environment, and the Java runtime environment will execute that and then gives you the result. Basically, this is what happens when you request a page in which you have an applet. You have an applet. Applet is written using pure Java. Remember these steps. The page is requested, the page is sent. The applet is requested, the applet is sent. And then the browser gives it to the JRE, and the JRE will execute that applet. Simple. In simple terms only, you can explain it. 2 to 3 lines only. So they may ask you a question like this: explain the different steps of how web pages containing JavaScript and HTML, Flash, and Java applets are executed. So you have to execute all the three diagrams. In simple diagrams, you can explain, okay, and then in 2 to 3 lines, you can explain. And then a little history of JavaScript. I told you that it was developed by Netscape, a company called as Netscape. In 1996, JavaScript was introduced, and then initially JavaScript was used only for making the website more interactive. For example, managing user interface, to make it more interactive. For example, the moment I take the for the moment I take the mouse over, for example, let us say I have I go to a website here, let us say mmec.edu, edu dot, sorry, dot in. So I go to mmec.edu.in. This is our website here. And here after I go, if I'll just show you where exactly JavaScript was used before. Now see, this is how our website looks like. The moment I take the mouse over, now see my mouse is here, okay? If I take it over about us, the moment I take it on top of that, you can see that the drop down is coming. You can see that this is getting dropped down. And the moment I come on admissions, then you can see that a sub menu is opening here. So the moment I take on academics, you can see that the drop down comes. The moment I take on placements, you can see this drop down coming. I remove my mouse over it, then it disappears. Okay, so this is drop down menu, and this automatically dropping down of the menu, the moment I take the mouse over it, there is a JavaScript that is running in the background, which is causing this to be displayed. So this is what JavaScript was used for initially, for the user interface, to make it more interactive. Now it is interactive. Before it was not like that. All the options had to be displayed on the one page only. This automatically dropping down, all that was not there before JavaScript. After JavaScript, this was introduced. Okay. So now JavaScript was initially used only for maintaining the user interface, making it more interactive. Later on, JavaScript was used for also doing server-side scripting. Today, I will tell you, many people use JavaScript for server-side scripting. Web applications today are developed. I told you that PHP is used for server side. Yeah, it was used. It is still used, no problem. Okay, but now JavaScript is also used very popularly. Very commonly, JavaScript is used. Okay, so what I was telling you is that JavaScript today is not only used on the client side, it is also used on the server side. On the server side, JavaScript is used for writing scripts which executes on the server's machine. But apart from that, JavaScript was also used for making the website more interactive, and it was possible to request server-side scripting to be executed through JavaScript. There is a concept called as Ajax. Very important. This was introduced in the early 2000. In the year 2000, it was introduced, the concept of Ajax. Ajax actually stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. JavaScript is the most important part in this technology. What is this Ajax? Ajax is a technology where if I have a web page, I will explain to you, there is a diagram also for that. It is possible for me to click on a button on a web page and then in the background asynchronously request something from the server, and the server will respond back to it. I will explain to you this concept later on. What is the meaning of Ajax? Ajax stands for, first of all, what? Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Very important technology. We are not going to learn this. I think it is there in the fifth module. In the fifth module, this Ajax is there. We will learn this Ajax in detail. Okay, in Ajax, most important, this is called as the heart of Ajax, XML HTTP request, a very, very important class. Through this only, it is possible to asynchronously request something from the client, from the server. If I am a client, if there is a web page is opened, if I click on a button in the background, while the page is still open to you, in the background, a request can go to the server, and then in the background only, the JavaScript can receive the data that has come back from the server and then can render the UI. It can render the UI. So that is what is possible through Ajax, and XML HTTP request makes it possible. Okay, so what is Ajax basically? It is, and the main part in this Ajax is JavaScript. Well, XML is also used, but JavaScript is the most important part here. Okay, so I'm not going to go into detail of this Ajax, but there is a diagram here in which I will explain to you what is Ajax and how Ajax basically works. Okay, how Ajax basically works. That is what I'm going to explain to you. Okay, now let us say there is a web page in which there is a form. Let us say that there is a web page in this there is a form. Okay, the name of the web page is form.html. Okay, so the client which contains the browser first requests for that page form.php. Okay, form.html or form.php. A request goes to the web server. The web server will then respond back with that page, and this page contains what? So this is the second step. You can see second step, requested page is returned. What does this page contain? It contains a form in which there are some radio buttons, and then there is a button here called as update. Four countries are there: Australia, Mexico, Canada, and United States. And then there is a update button. Okay, so this form is sent back to the client machine. It gets displayed in the browser. Now the user will do one thing. As the moment the page is displayed to the user will select Canada from the radio button and then clicks on the update. So the user selects country, then clicks update button. So once the user does that, this page is again sent back to a request is sent back to the server saying that the country is selected and the country is Canada. Now that gets attached to the query string. I've selected Canada and then I click on the update button. So a request goes back saying that the country selected is Canada and the form.php file is this. So that is the fourth step. In the fifth step, the page is again sent back to the client. The same page is sent back to the client. Now the country selected is Canada because the user has selected Canada there. So the country selected is Canada. And then after that, again, the user can respond back on the browser. There are other fields in the form of the page. The user can interact with the other elements of the form and then keep updating. So basically what happens is the moment I click on a button, every time a request is going to the server and the response is coming back. That is what is happening in a normal situation. This is normal HTTP request response loop. I click on the update button, a request goes, again the response comes back. The user again interacts with the form, again the request goes, again the response comes back. Basically, this is what happens in a normal HTTP request response loop. Every time I'm doing something, a request is going and response is coming back. The page is getting loaded. In between here, what is more important is the page is getting loaded every time. Now let us go and understand exactly what happens in case of a normal HTTP request response. First of all, the request is sent to the server, the response is sent. When the response is sent, the browser displays a blank page. Immediately you don't get, immediately you don't get the page which contains the form. First, there is a blank page, and slowly the form will get loaded depending upon the speed of the internet and all that. Okay, so I will just complete this much and stop for today. What I'm explaining to you is that in case of a normal HTTP request response situation, request comes to the web server. Here the client is not there, but you have to understand that this request is coming from the client, and the web server will send that page as a response to the client. First a blank page, and then after that the browser receives a response to its HTTP request. It's blank, and the browser window is blank. Slowly the form gets loaded, then slowly it renders the just received HTML browser window. So there is a blank page in between. First, when I request, there is a blank page. In the blank page, the form gets loaded. Then I click on the update button. When I click on the update button, what happens is again a request goes, and before the next form is created, there is again a blank page, because it will take a little time for the form to get loaded. It takes a little time for the form to get loaded. So a blank page comes and then the form gets loaded again. This is for the previous example here. It doesn't happen like that. What happens is when I request, a blank page comes, slowly the form gets loaded. I select something from this country, I click on the update button, again the browser window gets blank, and slowly then after that the page gets loaded. This is what happens in case of a normal HTTP request and response. Now let us compare this with Ajax. You can see here asynchronous data request or Ajax data request. When the page is first requested, the first thing that is displayed to the user is a blank form, and then the slowly blank page, and then the slowly form gets